So first of all, folks, as I've shared with some of you as you came in, good evening, welcome to our third reopening task force meeting, but first on-site gathering. Hopefully the first of many on-site gatherings as we kind of pull together. I'd like to thank you for participating in this important endeavor. We've got the state guidelines, we've got the initial guidance you just received this past couple of days, the frequently asked updated DESE guidance, and with the primary focus being on schools returning in-person instruction safely. And I underline, exclamation point, safely. So we're going to go through a presentation, relatively brief presentation, detailed piece to kind of bring the community of Freetown and Lakeville up to speed as to what's happening as it relates to what that plan is going to look like. Prior to doing that, I am going to ask membership who have signed in to just introduce in no particular order. Maybe go from this side of the room to this side of the room. I do know we have some people in the public. I'm thrilled that some people are out to see what's happening. I'm thrilled and thankful that LakeCAM is able to broadcast this so more in the community can know what's happening. I was being a little sarcastic earlier with some of you and saying, because there's no interest, right? With reopening of schools these days, I think you can't go somewhere and either have the radio, TV, something on where there's not some reference to that. So we have a lot to talk about here tonight, and I'm excited about that. So I'm going to put him on the spot first, no particular order. Mr. Ward, if you could just...
Hello everyone, Michael Ward, first and foremost parent. I'm also the principal of Freetown Elementary School, and I'm representing my principal colleagues of administrative staff.
Lori Damaris, Freetown-Lakeville Public Health Nurse.
Both towns.
Yes, both towns.
Sherry Barron, retired teacher in Lakeville and school committee representative.
Paul George, I'm a parent of 2 kids, a physician by training, and the associate dean for med ed at Brown University, and I've been going through a parallel process of reopening schools at Brown.
Excellent, thank you. Good.
Hi, Derek Gracia, former school committee member, a member of the community, and my wife's also a school teacher in the district. My daughter is a student in the district.
Good.
I'm Joan Bullock, and I'm the Assawamsett school nurse and a task force member.
And is that Jen Burke back there with you as well? Jen, is that a member, what nurse at intermediate school? Here?
Mary Abru. I have 2 children in the district. I am, I guess, a community member. I also run the PTO at, this year it'll be FLMS, but have been in all 3 schools that my children have gone to.
Hi, I'm Lisa Katzavet Balliard. I'm a parent of a Grace child as well as Assawamsett. I'm also a mental health therapist in the area.
Gail Trick. I'm a community member, parent of 2 children. My daughter will be entering 8th grade. My son, the 9th. He's also has special needs and is going to be in the life skills program at high school. And I'm also a physician assistant.
My name is Celeste Misalakis. I am a paraprofessional at Grace. I'm also an empty nester mom who had both of her sons go through the school system. And I'm also the EAFL paraprofessional representative.
Sure, what members? No particular order. Renee, you want to go?
Sure. Renee Vitale, 6th grade ELA teacher at FLMS and the president-elect of the EAFL.
Erin Steele, a 3rd grade teacher over at Freetown Elementary School. I'm also the VP, one of the VPs for the EAFL, and new role for me is I have a child entering kindergarten this year, so I'm also a parent of an incoming student.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gilbert. I'm a parent. I have 3 kids in the school, high school, middle school, and intermediate school. And I also work as a paraprofessional in another school district in a sub-separate ASD classroom.
Excellent. Excellent.
Hi, I'm Rob Flaherty. We're new to town for a year. I have 3 children at 3 different schools. I'm the hospitalist director at Morton Hospital. So we just, as you know, we're a COVID hospital. I've been at a million meetings about COVID and dealt with it more than I would like to, but reluctantly feel like we need to do this too. So it's quieted down where I've been, and I'm excited to hopefully contribute to this too.
Thank you.
Hi,
I'm Mary Beth Moore. I live in Freetown. I'm a substitute teacher in the district, and I have 2 children in the district. One is at Pontuit, and the other is a special needs son who is going to 9th grade, who should also be in the district.
Next member?
Hi, Dan Rutledge. I am a history teacher at Pontuit Regional High School. I'm also a track coach, and I'm one of the union reps for the EAFL. So.
Jim Galusio, I'm the Pontuit Athletic Director.
Rick Goodwin, Director of Facilities, longtime member of the town of Lakeville, now live in Assonet. Had 2 daughters go through the district. My father worked here before me. Very nice to see you all.
Louder. Just a little bit louder, please.
Hi, Andrea Fay. I'm the Food Service Director.
We have other members? Okay. So we have a collective group, a talented collective group representing a lot of people who have genuine and legitimate concerns relative to the reopening of schools. And so I really appreciate the wealth of expertise and talent we have here. And I had to turn away some individuals just from the sheer volume of that, and certainly want to make sure they're included in anything we do. And we're trying to be as transparent as possible. We're not necessarily a subcommittee of the school committee. We're simply a group that came together actually before the state dictated that you needed to do this group. We kind of had already had a jump start here in relation to putting a district-wide group together. So that's part of the initial comments that I just would like to make to the public and certainly to everybody here. The district, in creating this task force, already began the process to secure necessary PPE to prepare for the planning phase over the next 6 weeks leading up to the start of school in fall. In addition to establishing school-based teams, which I'll speak to in just a moment, to perform the feasibility studies for all 5 of our schools. Please keep in mind, and I've been reminding people over and over again, including my leadership team, 56 days until September 8th, or that starting time frame. So I know everybody wants to accomplish everything tonight and have things in place. It's not 6 months, but it is almost a 2-month time frame to do a lot of what we need to do and what we've already started doing to prepare properly. So I'm just asking people to keep perspective. The other thing I'd like to drive home, and I'm talking a little off script here, but I'd like to remind people that we can't get caught up in the politics of it, right? I mean, that has been much of what I've been observing last night, previous days. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of the same things, and yet one of the last segments I watched last night was 5 pediatricians all saying when asked the question, would they have their children return to school, their own children, they all answered yes. So that was an interesting side note. But I just would ask, there is certainly a national movement, right, in relation to schools opening up. There are certainly going to be state initiatives. But at the end of the day, we need to do what's best for our kids here in Freetown and Lakeville. And I'm not saying we should ignore that piece, but when I think of the stakeholders that are present, we're not going to do anything, at least from my perspective, and the school board supports that, that's not safe for our staff and for our kids. So we're well represented here, teachers and others. There is no way that I can support a plan that doesn't safely have those folks return, and I know that's why you're here as well. So that's not said from a PR perspective. I feel real positive in relation to what we've done to date and what we plan to do in the coming weeks to prepare properly to accomplish what we need to. Now, things are going to change, right? And there are going to be adjustments made, and we're still waiting for some guidance from the state. I remain confident with the state guidance, the local and state health numbers, that we can make a safe, smooth transition back to school in the fall. The focus for the commissioner has been, this is certainly not a summer that any of us have experienced, right, in our entire time frame. As I said to the transportation director, Ken Resendiz, who's on this task force but couldn't make tonight's meeting, when he said, how are we going to handle this, and Ken's been around for a while, I said, well, I'd love to be able to go back and pull the superintendent and the last transportation director that worked through a summer in the pandemic, but we'd have a little struggle to go back to 1918, right, to kind of see what that looked like. So again, we're on uncharted territory in relation to kind of where we're at in all areas. But I do think we're well represented. Transportation guidance is coming. I'm going to reference that. Food service, extracurricular, athletics, all those things will be included in the final document, which we should have by the end of the month. but they're all gonna be brought up tonight a little bit. There'll be some potential adjustments made to our school calendar. Some of it may be in relation to training our employees and giving us a little bit more time before our kids come back at the end of August. And so, although everything is not definitive to date, I am confident that if we collectively work together, that we will develop 3 models. That's our task right now, and I'll speak to that in just a moment, for the state by July 31st, to submit 3 overview models in relation to what's happening. So I'm going to walk us through tonight. I'll try to keep it brief, but it's detailed. Some of the first steps in the process in relation to what we can do as a task force to communicate to the groups, both in Freetown and Lakeville, that we're prepared to take on this challenge. I'm then going to have the little subcommittee group break up for some questions, for hopefully just a frequently asked questions or topics that you're concerned about in that particular area. There's some flexibility in the subcommittees, by the way, so when you see the list up there, we can make some adjustments in relation to your expertise. In some instances, you emailed me and said you'd like to be members of both because you had, obviously some interest and some expertise in those, and that's fine too. Really, much of what I'm asking this task force to do is to support what's happening at the school level with the leadership team to communicate so, in fact, we have families feeling comfortable that we're making the right decision for their kids and the staff. And that's ultimately, and I didn't introduce myself as superintendent of schools. I would have started like many of you. I'm a parent of 2 college-age students who are dealing with that process as it relates to being sent home and then potentially go back. Both of them are college athletes, one of which who just lost his football season, so I can certainly relate to a lot of what's happening. I'm going to go through the presentation. This will be available for everybody, and I'll actually forward it to you after this meeting, as I've done with other documents. So the mission, our goal is the safe return of as many students as possible to in-person school settings to maximize learning and address our students' holistic needs. In order to do that, in order to get students and educators back to school in person safely, we're going to have to rely on a combination of strategies, including key health and safety measures, masks, face coverings, physical distancing, hand washing, sanitizing, and staying at home when sick, just to name a few. This slide actually comes from a screenshot that I took from the commissioner and the governors. We have weekly meetings with the commissioner of education and the governor. And a little challenging maybe to see from there, but it basically identifies where Massachusetts is in comparison to so many other states, and much of the dialogue relative to those schools and those states reopening and setting their schools. And at the upper right, it obviously is the largest decrease is in Massachusetts. And the emphasis there is Massachusetts is among only 4 states on track to containing coronavirus based on the model that was presented. I'm simply sharing this with you because the commissioner and governor strongly is encouraging us to use that mission based on the numbers as they're presented today. And those numbers could change, right? They could change for Freetown-Lakeville, and they could change for the Commonwealth. But we are in a much better position in Massachusetts, and certainly I think in our communities, to provide some plans to have our kids safely return to school. So your task force membership, I won't go through that. Thank you for the intro. I know some of you maybe don't like public speaking, but I appreciate at least you connecting a name to a face as it relates to your tasks and responsibilities. 24 members, myself facilitating the group, 25. There's our calendar of initial meetings that we had. First 2 meetings were remote. We're having tonight's meeting. The next, I kind of referenced as kind of a town hall type of format, stealing from what much of the media is doing in relation to creating that community awareness. And I know we have some community members here, and we have LakeCAM telecasting. I am open, and some of the membership shared, with as much communication as possible so parents and community members feel comfortable that the decisions they're making are informed decisions. So if that turns into a weekly situation that you think would be helpful, be on a superintendent's corner, I'm open to that. I've simply identified, and if you see there, the first day of school, that's actually Labor Day. I'm not sending the students back till on Labor Day, but just kind of ballparking where we're at in relation to, we do have some time, as challenging as it is, and what we have ahead of us. School calendar's up, right? Right now, we're currently projected to go back before Labor Day. I envision we may have to make it a slight adjustment to that calendar. School committee will ultimately make that determination. The commissioner has, beyond hinted, suggested that in working with stakeholders that it may be valuable to build in some additional time, professional development time and training for employees. That has yet to be determined though, and it may adjust the schedule to the start of our school year. I'm not saying by weeks, by the way, so I don't want to hint and give a suggestion that we're talking weeks, but potentially days. Build a little bit more time front-loading, getting our employees and our school facilities ready, and then ultimately having our students safely return. So if you look at the stages of what this task force and what the groups are doing, we need to plan. We're currently in the process, and I'm going to speak to some COVID teams that are in place at each of the schools to look at what are feasibility studies. Do we have the ability from a space perspective, looking at social distancing, to address the needs of our student population of 2,800 students? Then it's obviously putting some things in preparation in place, and I'll speak a little bit to that. Implementation, rolling that out the Tuesday, September 8th. If you're seeing kind of a trend there, it's that idea right around that Labor Day we can hopefully kickstart some instruction for our kids. And then obviously we need to be sure, and what I'm really asking this task force to do and help with guidance and support is make sure that we're communicating so in fact parents can make the right choice for their kids, supported by what we're trying to do. So we did break down into, or we talked about, and this is the state model, the following three areas. Facilities and the environment. I've asked Greg Goodwin, who's the director of facilities, to facilitate that group. Teaching and learning. Mr. Ward, Mike Ward, is an administrator here and representing the leadership team. Paula Mueller is our lead nurse, and will handle the health, social, emotional subcommittee. I may ask Joan just to take some notes on that in relation to that, because she's also a nurse within the building. And then obviously we have school-level COVID-19 teams at all 5 schools. So the state basically said about 2 weeks ago we were ahead of that curve in relation to that. We had already created a district task force, but then the next responsibility was to be sure that each school was represented as they looked at the feasibility of whether they could bring students back in safely, and that's what these COVID teams are. So the subcommittees, I don't see anybody has any pens to throw anything at me. I've kind of identified where, took in some of your emails, and placed individuals in the following categories. There's some flexibility there, but for purposes of a Q&A and jotting down some questions that you think we might have to answer sooner than later for our facilities, I've listed the group here under facilities: Greg Goodwin, Jimmy, Andrea Fay, Paul George, Derek Rasha, Ken Resendiz, and myself. Teaching and learning, I've identified much of the teaching staff and some community members as well. You could take a look if you have a little challenge and difficulty. Again, I'm not locking you into that subcommittee solely, but tried to identify areas I felt either you asked to be part of or felt you could offer some expertise along with balancing it. And then social emotional, obviously I included both of our nurses and some medical individuals and some community members as well. Trying to balance it with some parents at different levels as well who have expertise. Again, we'll break up into these subcommittees at the tail end of this presentation to see if we can generate some questions and things that we need to answer sooner than later as it relates to the next steps within those state guideline areas. I've mentioned the teams. I want this group to know who really is rolling up their sleeves beyond this group and the community to get our schools prepared. So everybody in the state was required to identify a COVID response leader for each of their schools and a collective, comprehensive team that would begin to address some of the things we're going to talk about in just a moment. This is the high school team facilitated by Dr. Starkey. I won't go through the whole list. I simply wanted to be sure, and you will have access to this right after this meeting, as will the community. So we have the high school, went through a little too quick there, middle school, facilitated by the principal in each instance with some leadership. Intermediate school, Dr. Sullivan. Freetown Elementary School, Mike Ward. Got a little sneak preview of what's ahead. And then Bethany Pinal, principal at Assawamsett. So each of our schools. And we put those together, Mike, 2 weeks ago, right after the document came out, literally that weekend, and identified staff members and stakeholders within those buildings to begin looking at how prepared can we be for the start of school. So here's some of the things that I know the community wants to hear and learn about. And I know you want more information as it relates, and it's coming. So the state is requiring by July 31st to submit 3 models. And those 3 models must be a plan to have all of your students return to school safely. The full green model there using the stoplight. Okay. The yellow, which is a hybrid model, meaning a percentage of your students, 50%, a percentage of your students would return to school in kind of an on-off, remote, on-site instructional model. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in just a moment. And then the last, in red, would be our students engaged solely in remote learning. I would like to say similar to what happened in the spring, but it wouldn't be similar because we've learned so much from that that it's even going to be a better experience if that's where we end up. So the state is asking us to identify how this district, with its 5 schools, will use each of those models, with the priority being, from the state perspective, green, right? The students all returning to school safely. You'll notice there that we've begun the process of looking at starting times. So we're looking at the educational value, and for a given year, this year, 2021, making some potential adjustments. One of the adjustments we're looking to do is to bus middle school and high school students together, to push back high school students' starting time, approximately 45 minutes. So the high school students would start the school day later. We would group the students, busing-wise, transportation-wise, middle school and high school. Right now, as many of you know, it's intermediate school, middle school. The intermediate school students would ride the bus with just intermediate school students. And then Freetown Elementary School and Assawamsett Elementary School would continue. We have had to make some initial adjustments, and these are proposals. Again, those stakeholders that are here, that it impacts their work experience and all of that, you're going to be part of the process. You're going to be part of the process. But we needed to kickstart kind of where we were going to take this in a safe way. How are we going to transport 2,800 students, potentially, to and from school in the full model, right? How would we do that with half of the students? And then obviously we're not dealing with transportation, but we've looked at some adjustments from an educational value, but also from a safety and health responsibility. Now keep in mind, this update, and I reference PPE and signage and technology, we're looking at 1-to-1 devices, 6 to 12 for all students this year, rolling that out. We are looking at some additional capital projects. Transportation, I've referenced a little bit the busing. Keep in mind we still don't have the guidance from the state relative to what the total number of students that can ride a bus. We're hearing that it may be 1 student per seat. What that would mean, for those of you that don't know, transportation perspective with first student, it would mean that that would be about 24 students per bus. 24 students, 1 per seat. If that's ultimately, and again, I'm not telling you that's what the guidance is because I don't have the guidance from the state at this time. That document is coming. You could also potentially include 1 or 2 more students if that's ultimately the guidelines, if they're family members, right, if they're siblings. So you can consider that. Food service, again, waiting for the guidance as it relates to how we're going to provide meals for our kids, right, in a safe environment. They have not excluded the use of the cafeteria. I know that that's kind of been the sense that they have. They've established some social distancing and some guidance in relation to kids not facing one another and so forth. But in instances in schools that have eliminated the cafeteria, it's because they need it for the educational space. We're fortunate here in Freetown and Lakeville for a variety of reasons, but one is not space. We have been able to accommodate, based on our feasibility studies, the need to meet the needs of our kids with the space in our 5 schools. But I'd be happy to answer questions as it relates to that. So there are multiple things happening, and I guess what I wanted this task force to know is behind the scenes, those building level teams led by principals are in the process of doing some of the detail behind what draft plans would look like, because ultimately I have to sign off saying that in fact this district at the end of this month has the potential to reopen schools safely as it relates to July 31st being the deadline. Doesn't mean the plans have to be in place, and there may be negotiations in relation to kind of where we're at with schedules and teaching and learning and students. We're in the process this week, just so this group knows, and I'm going to share a little bit of this, of getting a survey out to families and get their input, and the impact that they have in relation to reopening in the fall. We're also going to be sending home a very, I'll be sharing it internally, a very brief email and Google survey to the staff to get some feedback in relation to kind of where they're at individually upon return. Obviously the adults in the building. Athletics, again, another topic to be determined. I know our kids are craving to get back and engaged as it relates to that. Jimmy, correct me, I want to say around July 21st is what the MIA has established.
They're meeting on the 21st.
Yeah, so again, kind of the timeline as it relates to kind of knowing where we're at. In addition to extracurricular activities like band, chorus, and so many other things that are integral parts of our kids returning to school. And we certainly value that well-rounded student. So what I'm trying to do tonight is kind of give you at least some of the foundation by which what's happening now are plans to be put in place. What I don't want anybody to leave is saying we haven't been, whatever stakeholder has been part of it, we haven't been part of that decision. I'm sharing with you right now, in fact, the commissioner was adamant this week and last week when he spoke, and we're going to hear him again Wednesday with superintendents, that he does not want to hear that districts have already made a determination in July about where they're at. So I don't want to mislead anybody here and say, so this is the plan and this is what time the but no. What I'm telling you is that in order for us to be prepared, we're providing the district and ultimately submitting it to the state with a model that we feel we can have our students safely return to school. I feel very positive about where we're at locally in relation to where that's at. Now, I'll put Mike on the spot in just a moment. The leadership team, I mean, people are working extremely hard to make this happen. It's no easy task, but it's happening everywhere. And so I'm certainly not throwing in the towel in relation to kind of where we're at. And again, I just kind of want to emphasize we need to do what's best for our kids. And we have to do it within the parameters of the information that we have in front of us. And I think based on the models and what we're looking at right now, we can adequately meet the needs of our kids and provide an informed decision for parents with all 3 models. And we've really learned a lot in these last 6 months in relation to the fact that we're looking at technology devices, right, as it relates to that being an essential component of education moving forward. Mrs. Medeiros, meaning at my home, would remind me I might lose my snow day excitement, right, in light of all what's happening, those time frames as it relates to remote learning. So much of it's been said that we may have a plan now to address when in fact we don't have students in school. But I would also be misleading you if I told you any of this work is easy. right? I mean, we were talking about that today. When you look at the remote model and our kids staying home, and then you look at the hybrid, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. So let's take a look a little bit more in detail at what this looks like. So all of our students returning to school, and the state has said that's what the priority is and needs to be. We need to be sure that we have all those safeguards in place, and that's what we're planning to do right now. We're in the process of doing that. Can we have all of our students and staff return safely to school? That's what our feasibility studies are doing now to determine from a facilities perspective that we have the space, that we can do the social distancing. We have, and I'll have the director of facilities speak to that in a minute, in relation to PPE orders that have gone in, things that are supplies and materials that are already in place 3 months out to address where we need to be. In addition to a lot of other work, and Mike can speak to this, represent the leadership team, right? To address the protocols in relation to bathrooms and the cafeteria and food service and transportation. Again, waiting still for some guidance. So the green is, again, all of our students returning. Now, I'm envisioning that when the survey comes out, there's going to be a small percentage of parents. I said small. Some of you may disagree, but I'm assuming small. When they hear what we're doing, that may not feel comfortable sending their kids back to school. The state's initial plan, if in fact we roll out all of our students, would be to provide a platform of self-directed, that those families would have the option to provide instruction for those kids. So that's if all the students return to school, and yet there are still some families that are not comfortable. So they would not necessarily be homeschooled. We have a percentage that do that, but they would have an instructional platform that the district would purchase, and we would provide that, somewhat self-directed. Different than remote learning, but that's right now what the state is looking at as it relates to all of our students returning. Yellow, or the hybrid model, and there are all sorts of options here as it relates to what you may have heard or will be hearing from districts. But generally speaking, it means that students come to school 50%, 1 week on site to the 5 schools. The other group is home and engaged in remote learning, with the district responsible to address the needs of both of those groups. So the idea being that we can address, or whether it be medically, whatever the determination is made, the parameters established, that we can't have all the kids come back, we could have a percentage of those students return to school, approximately 50%. And it would be an A group and a B group, 1 week on, 1 week off. We would still provide transportation. All sub-separate special education programs would be both weeks. The state has made it clear that that gap can't continue to grow for special education population. I couldn't agree more, right? I think for all of our kids, but specifically for those sub-separate programs, they would be maintained in a hybrid model both weeks on site. There are other options as it relates to hybrid models that school districts are considering. 2 days, 1 day remote, in the middle another day. It becomes extremely complicated and also challenging for community members and parents and the adults to navigate that. So although obviously 1 week on and 1 week off wouldn't be ideal, it would be kind of the bridge gap between having all students in the last, which is full remote learning, which is our red. I've referenced just one example. We have already secured one-to-one devices for all of our 6 to 12 students. We're exploring 4 to 5. We're submitting a grant, and we'll also provide devices K to 5 for those students who need devices like we did this summer. We gave out 299 devices. So there will be availability for the elementary schools, but the middle school and high school students will all be provided Chromebooks. Staff are all receiving all new upgraded Chromebooks as well. So that's happening regardless of the model here, right? Obviously, it will play into, the remote learning piece, but it will certainly also help us in those other models as well. So I know this type of presentation generates more questions than answers, but I needed to start the process with the community early enough so people can be prepared and understand what it is we're doing behind the scenes to prepare our kids. Again, our priority right now is green. Bringing our students back in a safe way, bringing our employees back, and having those kids on site. And I'm confident, based on the initial read from the leadership team, from the 5 principals, from the administrators, from the directors, that what I've seen to date does not discourage me in relation to giving our kids an opportunity to come back. We're doing the homework right now. Next Monday, I have a follow-up on transportation, how we're going to provide safe transportation. Hopefully I'll have the guidelines by then, but we are restructuring those schedules. So we're going to tweak the beginning and the end of the day. And we're going to ask stakeholders, like you guys did, and I say you guys, my employees did last year, to step up as you did in the springtime and work with me to do this in a trial basis. Because I've heard some of the politics behind it, the memorandums, the MOAs, and the fact that we're going to have to negotiate. I would say the whole 2021 year is a negotiation for all of us, right? I'm not even going to deny that. There's no doubt this will be a new experience, and we need to be sure that we have a plan in place, multiple plans in place to meet the needs of our kids. Because it's not for 2 weeks. It's not for 3 months, as it turned out in March. We're kicking off a school year, and so it is critical that we have the support of the community and people feel confident in what we're doing. So just some photos, because you haven't been to the schools lately. Well, some of you haven't been to the schools lately. This is what a classroom looks like at Assawamsett, with desks 3 feet apart. Mr. Ward, 20 desks?
Roughly, yes.
20 desks. When I shared this at home, and I spending endless hours at my house, you know how you get your editorial comments from your loving family. I got the comment, well, we've seen that classroom before. Took you all this time to kind of put that back, because obviously it has the trademarks of a traditional classroom, right? Students facing in the same direction. But that's Assawamsett 3 feet, which accommodates the numbers in our enrollment. That's a, did I skip?
You're right.
Yep, that's right. Come back. So that's a classroom 6 feet. That's Assawamsett Elementary School, 6 feet. So in the event that we are in a hybrid model, right, where half of our students are attending, so that class that was 22 is now 11. This is the type of classroom you're seeing. We wouldn't necessarily remove the desks, right, but that would be the spacing necessary. That is not what the state currently is saying, and the medical professionals in relation to what the superintendents have been sharing with the commissioner, right? But I wanted to share, we were asked to look at what that means as it relates to a classroom. That really identifies kind of what a hybrid model classroom would look like for our district. So that's Assawamsett. Freetown Elementary School. Facing the same direction. Again, I'm not even speaking to the detail that the school teams are looking at, which is direction, right? Traffic flow. All those things that we're going to have to put in place to be sure that we have not only safe environment with classroom desks, but we can carry that through the course of a day. 6 feet. Freetown Elementary School. The intermediate school. You know, I didn't do the 3 and 6 with every classroom. I think intermediate school, this is just the 3 foot. But again, you're basically removing a couple of rows, right, to get half of that capacity as it relates. another example. So then you have tables, and you have to take that into account in buildings. And you have elementary schools that have tables. We've taken that into account, folks. So we either have desks and/or we will use tables with individual students if we have the space in some instances, and we do. We have enough space to use tables, or we'll have to remove some tables. There's a science lab at the middle school. I'm sure you can, if you can't see, notice there's wheels on the lab tables. So it may require, and we have those desks readily available, and we have to may make some adjustments to some classrooms, and we're prepared to do so. We actually have a situation where we have additional desks throughout the district. So in some instances, in some communities, it's a real problem. They moved an entire school to tables. We did in certain grade levels, but still have access to desks that we will address. And I'd love to take credit for that, but it happened prior to me coming on board, and I just simply inherited that good planning and timing. But again, I just wanted to share with the community things that are happening behind the scenes in relation to making sure, facility-wise, that we can have our kids safely return. There's the middle school, typical classroom, 3 feet apart. Again, school committee should be recognized and get credit for their priority on class size. We have the staffing for the most part, and they've maintained and kept the priority of class size. Because if you have 28 or 29 students, like a lot of communities have, you're not putting them in a typical classroom, 3 feet apart. 6 feet apart, middle school. Same, just to show you the spacing. High school. Jumped ahead. So I apologize that it's kind of a lecture approach here to this at least initial piece, but I wanted to kickstart and let you see some examples of what's happening. The template, just so this group knows, no hidden agenda here, very transparent. Our understanding, I haven't seen my template that I have to submit on July 31st. State hasn't provided to the superintendents. So we have to submit a plan. It's July 13th for July 31st, and we haven't seen the document. But we have the parameters by which to complete it. We've been told it's going to be 2 to 3 pages, kind of just an overview, identifying whether you as a district feel that you can adequately meet the needs within the 3 models. They're not asking for all the detail yet. That's what's amazing, and keep in mind a lot of school districts throughout this country are faced with kids returning in 2 to 3 weeks, and certainly under different circumstances throughout the nation. So that's why I would ask that we don't politicize this, that we do what we think is best for our kids within the parameters of what the state's establishing, and that we let medical experts and we let local boards of health and those medical people that are not only in these seats but in the communities support our plan or tell us we need to revisit it or tweak it to make some adjustments. As I said to my leaders, Mike was in a meeting earlier today, I don't want to put anybody in a situation, whether it be my employees, my administrators, or kids, that's not safe. I'm a parent first and foremost. So at the end of the day, as I look at 2,800 students, we have to do what we think is best for our kids moving forward. Although I have to say, and I promised I wouldn't totally editorialize. I actually said I wouldn't editorialize at all, but take a little bit. I'm hard pressed to think that we can't get our kids back in school and that we can do it safely. And I think it's in their best interest, and I think it's I think we as a community feel it's the right thing to do. I have to tell you though, certainly I know there's some concerns as it relates to how safe this is going to be and some steps that we need to take. So as I look at the next steps, and I'm going to ask a couple of facility people to speak about some things. We've got the initial guidance from the state. We look at our existing enrollment, and I can speak to that if you have questions on that. We're looking at our calendar. We're looking at those facets of the school day, transportation, food service, athletics. We're trying to identify the staff and what those responsibilities are to prepare. Greg, if I could ask you just to jump in here quick, just 1 second. So our Director of Facilities, along with our Director of Finance, has already identified and attempted to purchase, and so this idea that PPE is not readily available, hand sanitizer, maybe some other things, I'm going to put you on the spot, maybe 35, 40 seconds, but kind of just give some, just briefly, Greg, some things that we've already taken some steps initially.
Sure. So we've already placed 2 significant orders for PPE. We've got hand sanitizer coming, we've got gloves, gowns, face masks. A little bit louder for you? Okay. All right. So we've got the majority of this stuff on order. We received part of our first shipment today. We got 2 pallets. On that will be a lot of the face masks. Gloves are a little bit on the back order because of the material to make them on the nitrile gloves. But all those items are ordered and they're on their way here. So we're looking pretty good as far as that. All the recommendations by the state as far as quantities, all that stuff is on its way here.
Greg, can you just take a pop-up real quick and just show, so I guess in addition, just to, again, I'm not going to give you all the detail or bore you or get you too much into it, but just an example. So we've made a purchase and have one of these devices in each of the schools. This is one device, the others are back-ordered. We're expecting them in the coming weeks. Greg, I'm gonna turn it to you just to speak. I don't know how well you can kind of see with the light.
Can everybody see this?
Over here.
Can you get a good look at this okay? All right, this is an electrostatic sprayer. Basically, it's like taking a balloon, rubbing it on the wall, get the static electricity from it. This tool here will put out a combination of water and bleach, and it will stick to the surface. If you put a black light on it, you can see it. If you put it in a bathroom, on porcelain, on the sinks and stuff of that nature, it will actually wrap around it. It will show you what it sticks to. It's good for bathrooms, cafeterias, entryways. You let it sit for 10 minutes as a dwell, you're good to go. If you have anything left on the surface, you can touch it up. This is the only one we have. We got this in March. We have 4 more ordered, 1 for each building. We're looking at getting them in August. So this is the quick, fast approach to getting someplace that we need to be quickly.
So on top of additional resources and material and staffing and creating some new plans, that's just one example of some things that, again, March, you referenced that prior to everything really unfolding as relates to kind of where we're at. Again, that's not said, so that's your plan. No, it's just an example of what are a multitude of things that are happening as it relates to getting our schools from a teaching learning perspective, from a social emotional health perspective. The nurses have been integral and supportive. We have a nurse at each of our buildings in relation to making sure that we have thermometers and things like that that have been ordered and things are in place. I actually have stock of gloves and things that are actually not bad. We're talking, when Greg references the gloves being back, we're talking 3 months out. We're trying to make sure we have supplies for that. The state's has a process in place as it relates to that. So one of the things I'm going to ask the groups to do today, and certainly the people in the audience can join, is we're going to just facilitate kind of, and maybe I'll just open it up just in questions in general prior to doing that. If you could, based on what you heard tonight and what some of your issues and concerns are, share with Mike, with Joan, with Greg, some items that you think people need to know, if not now, need to know in the next couple of weeks to make an informed decision. So one of the things I wanted to share with you, at the very bottom it says survey stakeholders, families, and staff. We're in the process of just a very brief survey that we're going to probably try to get out in the next day or two. And the survey is basically going to identify what school your child's attending next year, what grade level, how comfortable do you feel about your children returning to school in September, given what you know today about COVID-19, you would choose, you would prefer, and then there's kind of a multiple choice, what type of model. If schools reopen full or part-time, do you plan to transport your child? So there's a transportation question. This is just a little sampling of about 10 questions. Again, any of that's done any surveys know that if you start to get too comprehensive and detailed, you don't get the information. But we tried to highlight kind of general sense about where people are at as it relates to reopening from a personal family perspective, hit upon transportation, technology, and a couple of those other key areas. As I mentioned to you, staff are also going to receive an email from me as to where they're at, right? We're going to be sure that adults are comfortable Because I watched the news the other night, and I was watching the setup in that schools would be, I guess, a safer place if it were just kids. And I thought of the entertainment value of just kids with no adults, and there are probably some kids that would love that process, and probably some adults that would love that too, but obviously we need to be sure that not only the kids feel comfortable and are safe, but the adults that are working with them can do that. And I generally, I can say from an anecdotal perspective, I've only heard from one employee to date relative to that, but I haven't surveyed those individuals. So I guess part of my point today is that for those stakeholders that have not felt part of the process, we had to start somewhere, and so we relied on the essential people in the schools to kind of kickstart these plans, and then through this task force we can roll out kind of some additional items and questions. I have no problem with doing a road show at each of the schools, because obviously there are needs at the elementary school that are not there. In fact, I met with so the leadership team met a couple of days ago, and then we met again today, and this morning, as Mike can speak to, the elementary administrators met with the directors and myself, and then I met with the secondary people. Because obviously Dr. Starkey and Mr. Higgins have some different concerns in relation to, rightfully so, as parents, to what's happening with the older population of students. So there are going to be some things that just, to expect that school is going to be the same isn't even logical. But I feel very good about where we're at as it relates to being prepared. So I don't want that to be misinterpreted or misrepresented. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but we know what the priority is. It's to be sure that we can have our kids safely return. It's a matter of getting some of the details. So before we do subgroups and come back, questions, comments? Let's see if I can. I'll leave it there. You couldn't get out of here without a raise the bar slide, right? I had to basically put that in the questions. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just introduce yourself, recognize, and then I think you have to broadcast it loud. I see Derek. Derek, feel free.
Yeah, Derek Gracia. A couple of things. The survey, one of the things I thought would be valuable is a survey with questions developed from this committee.
Yep.
We have some expertise in the audience, so I thought it added a little more value to your survey. So I don't know where you are in that process, but I'm thinking that maybe some people have some questions that they've heard either from community or they can offer based on their experience. I think that adds some more value to your survey.
This is teed up to get your input, so okay. It's not like set to go out tomorrow morning. The plan would be the time frame is I would need that information from you. I think it's a great idea, by the way.
Second point, it's rather disappointing to me that we have no guidance on transportation when that's the first phase of getting a kid to school. So that's very disappointing. Have you thought that out with Ken Resendiz yet? Have you thought that process and developed something in your mind? I'm not asking you to share that, but I got to think we're ahead of the state here, because that's all good planning, but it means nothing without getting the kids to school safe.
So I can tell you, I've had multiple meetings with Ken. Those of you that know me well, I've been here 6 years. We are planning, waiting for the guidance. If we wait for the guidance, we're not going to be ready. So, and that's not a criticism. My colleagues are clamoring at that piece though, because at the end of the day, that safety health issue is critical. We need to know what is a safe approach to transport our kids. And we don't have that information to date. We should be getting that. So we've made some assumptions, Derek, in order to do that, multiple assumptions. We do have CDC, so there is some information out there in relation, but they have not identified to date from the state kind of where we're at. Well, you want to come back? Well, go ahead.
I'll let someone else go. I have one more though.
But so to Derek's point, anybody who's here can provide some information to me, an email relative to items. What we did is everybody's doing the surveys, folks. You guys didn't recognize that, right? So we looked at 4 or 5 communities, we pulled our resources, and we kind of are developing similar questions. But I would absolutely encourage and would want task force membership to feel that they were part of a process prior to a survey going out. The survey, in my opinion, think about this, say Monday, well, I mean, it's a Monday, lost track of time here in the summer. But I would like to get the survey out by the end of the week. I don't think we can afford to wait too much longer to get that, pull that information out. So I think, but that gives us a week and members opportunities to email me, text, whatever it may be, to provide. So to your point of, as far as there being a value to your input, absolutely. I encourage it. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, from a parental planning standpoint, I think the hybrid model scares me the most because it doesn't allow for very good work planning and return to work. And I'm wondering two things. One, if you would consider letting parents know in advance that their kids are in the A group or B group so that they can, and what dates or what weeks the A group is, what weeks the B group is, so that we can plan work schedules. And second is just to coordinate so siblings are in the same week so that you can just, yeah.
So two absolutely valid points, and again, for time, I felt I can certainly address that. So the answer to both those statements is yes. So we have initially identified the alphabet as the distinction there, separation, right? Kind of an A to L, M to Z. Recognizing that it addresses most families and siblings, although we do have some differences in names and we have to make some exceptions and we'll have to waver that line a little bit. But absolutely, Paul, to your point, and parents should know that when the hybrid model is, I'll give you a transportation example. So if 46 students are assigned a bus, the bus driver will know of that 46, of the 23 of them are in A group and 23 are in B, that type of situation. Likewise, a second grade teacher will have identified the two groups. The parents will know 1 week on, 1 week off. I could, again, as a parent, it's clear, well, I shouldn't say it's clearly. From my perspective, it's the most challenging in relation to the work environment, the child care, the health and safety of our kids in relation to who has that type of schedule that permits that. But it's a safe model in relation to the fact if we can't get all our kids back. But so to answer your question, families will know what group their children are in. When I say their children, multiple in a family, and principals know that they'll navigate that well in advance. Not that that's an ideal model, I should say, but the other models that you're hearing some school districts consider, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this, then Thursday, Friday, really even make it more challenging for community members. So at least, but absolutely, that will happen. Yes?
A few comments. One is a lot of the success or failure will determine how bad COVID is and the prevalence in the community, right? So people will kind of declare themselves as planners, and some people will call them anxious. Others will be declared as inappropriately not forward thinking. And I think it's real important to be aware that we probably haven't been through this before, and that's okay to have different groups, but just to recognize that that's something I saw on a hospital level. We had an umbrella organization that sent down guidance as well, which tended to be late and staying nimble and anticipatory on the local level and looking over the horizon was very helpful. One thing that I'm not sure I'm picking up on is that I don't know if the school nurses are here, I think it'll be a tremendous burden on them. And I think that to wait, if the guidance comes down 3 weeks from now, and then you're trying to like bolster up your nurses, or whoever's gonna figure out, because you'll have kids who will come down with symptoms like, oh, I'm tired, I'm a little achy. They're gonna need to go somewhere, because you're gonna err on the side of trying to keep them not as vectors in your system. There'll be employees the same way. Well, there'll be a pool of temporary, substitute teachers who are just ready to go. And that's going to be much bigger. But more importantly, the umbrella and the network of nursing or whoever's going to do it, of keeping track of all those people who are in various stages of testing, various stages of quarantine at home. That's very, very complicated. Having worked with employees who I had like 3 of them sent home all in one day, like all of a sudden you have healthcare, you have a workforce issue. So those are the biggest things to me that I think will run into time crunches all of a sudden. That you know, I'm not sure that the state is going to be able to kind of solve that for us if we don't see it coming.
And again, I don't want to appear critical. I actually have said to a few folks, I don't envy the commissioner's position, the governor's position in relation to this. It's not critical. We want that information just like the community wants it, right? And I think we're going to have to prepare. I can tell you that the nurses are already in the process with principals of identifying an isolation area, a room, and then putting in protocols as it relates. We do have one nurse per building. You know, in some districts that's not even the case. But making sure that we have that in place, and you're right, we can't wait for that to be in
One
place.
thing that's not helpful was just bringing in someone who wasn't even a nurse just to keep track of the spreadsheet of all the people who were sick.
Yeah.
And figuring out what was their test results, what did the pediatrician say, because then there's a very high rate of false negatives on the test. So if someone has the classic symptoms, are you going to clear them to come back just because their test was negative? Which is a very, very important issue to kind of think ahead on, I think too.
So the superintendents are concerned because in general, getting additional support and support staff, substitutes, and individuals, lay people who can help with those processes are challenging under normal conditions. Right, but we're absolutely going to have to do
Now
that.
you're asking people to come into potentially a difficult exposure scenario, and maybe they're older. And
One of the principals who were nameless to me today said, please make sure that at no point you use the term easy. We were looking at multiple options, and I said, well, that's the easier approach. And they said, please tonight, make sure it's not, and I referenced that because critical. So when we get into some of our subgroups, the social emotional health issue, some of these things have come up. I need to hear some of that. Mike needs to hear Greg so we can jot some of those things down. So if we're not already addressing them, and I think we are in some instances, as I've referenced, and I just didn't get into the detail behind it, that I can share that, but right on the mark. Other comments or questions, Mary?
I actually have a question about, from the initial guidance, they had said that these kids should be grouped and stay together for the whole day. Does that include transportation? Does that mean that these kids should be transported together from their homes to the school into their classrooms and be together from get to go? Because that's kind of what I read, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily
It
what
is
they're
not
saying.
part of our plan here district-wide. They are absolutely recommending in an elementary school, folks, just for, if you think about the cohort.
Yep.
It's easier to move teachers and keep those students together as an elementary school would be. You go to our intermediate school, they're in teams of 2. So instead of those kids moving, you would have the teachers move. Again, we're talking within the school day though, we're not talking transportation to your point. And then at the secondary level, we've got to coordinate, you have teams. And the middle school principal, because I was with him today, spoke to his group about the fact that within those teams and wings, you can limit the exposure and those opportunities and keep those kids together. And at the high school, obviously, it's much more challenging to do so.
Because my follow-up question to that is, if these are actually kids in cohorts, how many of those kids would need to be sick before the entire cohort has to go home?
Yeah, I'm not.
Those are just the questions that I keep looking at, like down
But that
the line.
goes to, okay, so what's the protocol in place when a student is potentially symptomatic, and then kind of what does that do to, all those things will have to be in place in relation to whether, are you shutting down a classroom, are you shutting down a school? I mean, those types of things have to be answered. But I want to be sure I deduct that portion of it. The cohorts are not inclusive of transportation.
Okay.
Right now. Right, we're looking at within the school day. And I can tell you the high school's looking at a little more block scheduling, just to give you an example of a potential, which is instead of 8 periods and having students move 8 different times, have longer periods of time in less traffic. Again, these are all things that have to be worked out with our employees because they're clearly different working conditions and involved, but I'm not misleading anybody, and we have a lot of employees here. This year is not the same, right? This is a 1-year deal. It's a 3-month, it's a 6-month piece, and I'm asking everybody to make an investment to do what we think is best and safe. but that you make a valid point. The cohorts that we're looking in the limit is within the school
Just the school day, okay.
piece at this point. Aaron, did I see him?
Yeah, just one question.
Sure.
You know, I know you talked about the COVID teams that are at the schools and the school-based plans
Yeah.
that are happening. Is that something that you plan to want to bring here, or is that just something that's going to you and
Meaning here to the
like this
task
task
force?
force?
So right now, they're in the process of submitting detailed draft plans that would come to this group and ultimately to the state for peace. But I don't physically plan to have them come through, but I will make available those plans to this group. And I know some of you are representative of that, so you can see some of the detail behind. I've hinted at a couple of the examples just to answer some questions, but I don't want there to be kind of this path that, for example, families haven't been surveyed. So for me to make an assumption, and my staff hasn't been, in relation and say, you know what, I'm confident that all of my employees are prepared to come back to work. I can't really say that today without using just anecdotal evidence, right? When I want to survey those individuals though, and if you think of the question that I'm asking employees, it goes something like this. Are you prepared to come back to school, to work? Are you in a high-risk category? Or do you fall in a high-risk category because you are taking care of someone who falls in a high-risk category and as a result, or child care purposes, right? So there's multiple reasons why an employee may not feel comfortable to come back full setting. We'll have that information real soon, and to Aaron, to your point, I'll roll that information out. Mike, maybe you could just give a little bit, but I don't put you on the spot from a leadership team perspective. Talk about what the building level teams are, what you're doing specifically, and what those teams are doing, and how we can get that information so they can see it.
Sure, so as Ms. Medeiros has shared, we have to come up with 3 plans, right? You know, the green, the yellow, and the red. And just speaking from Freetown Elementary, we've met twice, the school-based team. We're having these conversations right down to policies and procedures when bus arrives. So what's arrival look like? Transitions. Are we using these same doors? Are they going in separate doors? Is it a one-way traffic down the hallway? These are the type of questions that we're doing, and we're going to cover and share out amongst our staff, make sure they have it, and then obviously get it to you. And we do that for the yellow model, which is the hybrid, and then obviously remote, and those type of things. So we're sharing that. That's across the level. Ms. Pinal and Dr. Sullivan. Obviously, elementary, we have these conversations, and as a secondary, we come together. As much as Mr. Medeiros gets the information from the commissioner, he's following right back up with us, and we're getting together. So we're constantly having these teams, and we've had proposals. We share out with them. We face the same type of questions that I don't have all the answers to right now, and I'm okay with that. And I sort of say that to my staff. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm hearing it. I'm going to find out the information. I'll get it back. It would go from there. So from there, we submit it to Mr. Medeiros, and then we'll share it out with our respective schools, and then get it out to this team. But that's sort of the process that we go through.
So just so this group thinks, if you think about that 2-week window between potentially our next meeting, unless you wanted to schedule another meeting, they'll be submitting plans to me that are draft plans, so I can then I'll obviously submit something to the state. And that information will be able to be shared with this group as it relates to each of our 5 schools. And I know I kind of just went through the slides rather quickly, but please go back through them. They'll be available. I'll send it to you, email, but I'll also put on the website. Notice those groups are well represented by counselors, by nurses, by custodial maintenance staff. I mean, there's a genuine concern from the leadership team relative to making sure we can not only have the building ready to go, but that we maintain that environment and that it remains safe and healthy for our kids. So to answer your question, I certainly think we can add that. Mike, I just want to kind of highlight that. We don't have all the answers. We don't. But we're getting the answers, and we're turning these around pretty quick. On a daily basis, I am getting updates at the state level, but also locally about what's happening at each of our schools and what we're doing in preparation for that. It's multi-tiered, and I'm trying to not overwhelm you, but these are the types of questions, and I talked to Joan, to Mike and Greg earlier about maybe in a smaller group, kind of just reiterating some of these points that you guys have shared and saying, hey, I'm a parent. This is what I need to know in the coming weeks. One of the challenges is doing a survey this week is if you're not informed about potentially what it looks like, how do you answer that I'm safely ready to have my kids return to school when I don't know what school is going to look like? And yet, we had some health professionals share, we can't afford to wait and survey you in August. We need to be prepared. We're anticipating, just to give you some examples, I'm anticipating, we have a lot of our students that are transported by parents and families. Just if I was going to quiz this very bright, articulate group, think we're going to see more students being transported by their families?
Oh, yeah.
I think so, right? Until they're convinced that busing and transportation, with all due respect, Superintendent Medeiros, is in place. No, I'm going to transport my child. And in some instances, let's be honest, that may be a safer approach, and we have to come up with a protocol in place that is related to the kids coming into the schools. But those types of detail, the plans that are sharing that Aaron asked about, that many of you are concerned about, that's happening for all three models. Right? What we learned in the spring about remote learning, we can address that. The hybrid model is somewhat unique, but they know what the parameters are. And then as I get information from the state, they get the information from the state. I'm literally on a conference call with the superintendent on occasion, and I'm forwarding them information because they're chomping at the bit to get some of the same info.
So I
Very
have a
good.
question about your survey and about asking parents if
Yep.
they're planning on transporting their children. What kind of a time frame would we be committing to? Like if we had to commit to
Yep.
not putting our child on the bus, would it be me saying I'm going to drive my kid from now till June, or can we do it by semester so that parents would feel more comfortable saying, yes, I'm going to drive my child this semester. Let's look again
Yep.
in December and see
It's-
if we're going to do it again.
It's a great, loaded question, and I'm going to give you...
Because otherwise I'm telling you my kids are going on the bus.
But an honest answer, right? I mean, so the question's going to be read for the 2021 school year, right? That's what we're asking to. Now, there's no way that parents are going to be able to commit to that. Some might be and say, listen, I've always done it, I'm going to do it. A small percentage. There are going to be some that, I like to try it. I'm going to start until I'm convinced that what you guys have in place is working, and then I may jump in. We have a responsibility to safely transport all the kids, right? Everybody. So that's the plan that Mr. Resendes is putting in place right now. It is a deal breaker for a lot of school districts, folks. I'm not saying it's going to be a deal breaker for us. But if you can't safely transport all of your students, what do? Right? We have the ability, based on surveying and get information, to make determination to regroup kids. For those intermediate school parents, I know I kind of flung that out at you guys from an educational value perspective. How many high school students are going to be disappointed to go to school a little bit later? Not many, right? All the research is saying from an educational value perspective, it works. I think separating some of our middle school and intermediate school students on transportation brings with it some real advantages. Dr. Sullivan was very happy this morning when she heard her intermediate school students potentially might be transported, just those kids alone. But Mary, to your point, there's no way we're going to say, but we need to get some information and get a sense of whether 25% of our population is going to transport their children.
So what I'll say for me is that I'm going to tell you my kids are going to be on the school bus.
Yep.
But they're never going to be on the school bus. I'm going to bring them, they're going to walk. But I don't want to give up the opportunity in the spring,
Yep.
once the vaccine's out, for them to
Yep.
have a seat on the bus.
I'll put another layer to the detail behind this, and we could be here all night with these questions, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, right? How about if there are no athletics? And no extracurricular activities? More students on the bus?
Yep.
How about the fact that maybe some kids couldn't get their license?
Right.
Based on all this that's happened? Potentially more students on the bus? The colorful conversation, I said colorful, Mr. Resendes may deny that portion of it, that I had with Mr. Resendes in transportation on Friday, I described it as colorful, was you're going to assign and transport all my kids safely and tell me what it's going to take. And then I'll worry about, meaning as a district, whether we can afford to do that from a financial perspective, right? Whether we have to do double runs, what that entails. Just to give you an idea, we cut 2 buses a couple of years ago. Each bus was about $90,000. $90,000. So part of the plan that he's looking at is if we had to restore 2 buses. He was required, we kind of all take shots at different individuals, right? And so we complained to the state on multiple models and it's more work. And then what do you think I did to transportation? I said, no, you're gonna give me what it looks like with our current fleet of buses, because if I tell you can have more buses, you'll just invariably do that. But we're looking at that. We have 22 buses right now, 2 to Old Colony students. We have more students coming to the high school. So those types of variables though, so unfortunately a survey in July, it's gonna be somewhat challenging, but we need some data, right? We need some data to determine whether we can feel comfortable. A lot of districts are saying as a result that they can't bring all their kids back because of that. A lot of districts are initially saying that they don't have the space. So we checked that box off better than a lot of districts. The 3 campus schools in our elementary school give a lot of the people who preceded me, administrators in both communities, a lot of support. You built facilities and set up a situation that's safely able to meet the needs of the enrollment. Then it's transportation. Then it's one of these, what about food service? I won't put Andre on the spot yet. We still don't have the guidance and direction in relation to food service.
My last question.
Yeah.
Any conversation of having a crossing guard at the 4-way cross so that kids that lived within, I mean, I'm a quarter of a mile from here, kids that live within the area would have a safe pass to get across the street?
Yeah, so we have, I won't say specifically crossing guard, but we've talked about additional staff. I mean, walking is a little challenging for our environments in our schools, where other communities have a little bit more flexibility there. Because if you think about this campus, I mean, we've got, some of the locations, it's challenging.
Yep.
We're gonna have to, I was talking to Mike today, I won't put him on the spot, about the whole number at FES, at Freetown Elementary School, the use of the Bullock Road and the fact that asking local law enforcement to help us out in relation to kind of facilitating that safely. Again, it's all of this information and some things that we haven't thought about that I'm counting on you. So when Derek kickstarted the fact that, did you think about this and would you be open to getting some of this expertise? Yes, I'd have no problem in relation. I can tell you right now, the survey as it stands, set up in kind of a template form, was 8 to 10 questions. Because we didn't want to overwhelm or have people not, although I know there's a big investment right now in this, but we didn't want to have this, and I've seen some of them, 6 and 7 page documents and 32 questions, and some of the questions, if you look at some of the districts, they're doing a lot of surveying relative to technology, where we kind of did, I won't say all of that, but quite a bit of that this past spring when we were out there. Sherry?
I certainly, health profession is not my expertise whatsoever, education is, and children and students. However, I've been reading a lot about the American Pediatric Association. They are coming out very strong and saying, and I'm delighted to see what you're putting out here. I think I've figured over 20 times you've said the word safely. They are saying that if you can safely get your children back to school, we need to do that, because otherwise their social, their emotional, their physical health is all being stunted by keeping them at home. So I'd like somehow to get that message about what the American Pediatrics Association is saying. And the healthcare folks here, if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I'd like the community to understand what they are saying. A lot of them are not following it as closely as most of us are here.
So much of the conversations with the superintendents and the commissioner, folks, just so you hear that, because you're not privy to that. So he has a conference call with just the superintendent, so the educational leaders there. Much of it is often him bringing in health professionals to share their expertise in relation to what they're doing. Pediatricians are talking about making sure, and that group, and we have some doctors here that can comment on that, and making sure the local pediatricians within a community can speak to their families about what would be a safe approach. Because why wouldn't you trust your own child's doctor as opposed to an educator? And so they've been speaking to us, and I didn't want to appear to drive that home politically. And so I again, separating, it's been a real struggle. I've been in education 31 years. What I've watched over the news in the last week, maybe for the last 3 months, like many of us, right? It's been painstaking. But it really starts to hit home when you start to look at educators and then the division. And yet I thought to myself, it's about doing what's best for our kids. Doing what's best for Freetown and Lakeville. Within the parameters of the Commonwealth and what needs to happen for our kids. And we are at a different place. I hope other portions of the country don't drive a decision locally that we have to make. Because they're in a different circumstance. And we could, and it's alluded to, that could change for us too, right? And I think that's the whole concept behind the flexible model. That we could return safely and then have to move somewhere else. And so we need to be prepared, and I think that's why the state is making sure that, in fact, you have all those three things in place in the event that you have to go there. Paul, go ahead.
I was going to say that, so I agree. I think as a physician, it's important to get kids back in school, but I think it's also important to communicate what will happen if kids do get sick and have algorithms in place, right? So I have a different population of students. I have medical students who are being exposed to sickness every day. And we've had a few of them who come to us saying they have symptoms of COVID, and we have a clear algorithm for what happens next. And we've been able to communicate that with them. And so I think it's important to communicate to parents if someone gets sick, if a kid's exposed, these are the steps that are being taken, and to do that proactively so that parents know what to expect beforehand so it doesn't seem like we're reacting after something happens, exposure happens.
Absolutely. Derek, you
Yeah, two things. I'm happy to hear that you're not going to make transportation on a what-if scenario. It's going to be all students riding the bus. We can't have those situations. I'm planning around that. Secondly, based on what you said earlier, and this is the absolute truth, there's a lot of districts that aren't going to meet these guidelines. Mm-hmm. Maybe not all three of them. Well, not even remote learning, because some of them didn't meet remote learning when we were doing it. So the question is, do you think our hand's going to be forced as a result of any of those other districts?
So you didn't want me to editorial, I didn't want to editorialize, and you're asking me, well, I think you topped Mary's loaded question with that. No, Derek, that's a real legitimate question. And Mike was part of the leadership team today. So I'll tell you what I candidly said to them. I hope not, but I am concerned that decisions beyond us will dictate what options we have locally. But I will say to you what I said to my leadership team, and Mike can attest to this. You don't have any control over that. We have way too much work, too much important work to do to be caught up in what the state may ultimately do if 85% or 75% of the districts don't do that. I think that's why they're doing the feasibility study. Right? I think the state is trying to determine how many schools a month out are even in a place to come back. And then based on that, do 3 models become 2? Do they become 1? Potentially. Potentially. But what I said, and Mike can attest to this, and Greg, I said, listen, we have way too much important work to do relative to some of the things parents have shared, relative to protocols and details. And we're going to do all that. And I can't promise you, on August 20th, something's going to come out that says, here's what the expectation is.
Well, my only suggestion was that as a community, if we feel that what we've done and all the hard work we've done is put in place, then we got to let the commissioner and the state know that as a community.
We had. I'll give you a very honest anecdotal answer. So the Old Colony superintendents, which is the Southeastern Mass superintendents, the other day, a bunch of my colleagues said we can't do full instruction at the secondary level. So I said, with all due respect, right? We all hate that line. To my colleagues, I said we can. Freetown-Lakeville. we're looking at that. So please don't make a judgment or generalize for all schools quite yet. I'm not saying we had it all answered and worked out, but likewise, I think we're going to have to, and it would be my responsibility, and I did, representing this group and this task force responsibility to make sure that you guys feel you're included and then voice that communication relative to kind of where we're at. I don't have any problem making sure that these meetings are open, they're transparent, that people, the more information, the more informed our communities can be in relation to kind of where we're at, the better off we will be in a decision. And then we certainly, you know, if something dictates us beyond at the state level in relation to that. Again, we've got some real challenges ahead of us, right, in relation to kind of putting this all in place. But it's July. Close with this with my group that I did today. It's July 13th. We have a lot of days ahead of us to properly prepare. Enough? Maybe never enough, but almost 2 months of preparation time to do this right. Other comments or questions before we break up into subgroups? Yes, Celeste, go ahead.
I just have a quick question. It's maybe for Greg. You mentioned the PPE supplies that are on order, including the hand sanitizer, gloves, gowns, and face masks. Would face shields be part of that as well?
Some of that will come from the nurses. They're going to look into that. I've bought them for the staff as far as the custodial and maintenance staff for cleaning restrooms and stuff. And if need be, if we have to get them from the vendors that we're ordering them from, we'll have to collectively get together and talk amongst the nurses and so on.
So Celeste, I can jump and answer that a little bit too, in addition to what Greg said. So the nurses will have their proper piece, but we also have sub-separate and employees that would need that. So we have ordered through Reed's Collaborative specific devices and face shields for not just our special education potential individuals, up to 250, but so there'll be some unique circumstances that paraprofessionals and or teachers. One of the things that we recognize is some of the face shields, the kids need to see that you speak. So we are attempting to take a look at that. What I'm going to say, and I know it's running a little bit late, and I apologize, and thank you for coming out, is in the subgroups, make sure, and I asked Greg and Mike and Joan to jot down the questions. These are the types of things. If you haven't thought of this, can you write it down and be sure that you bring that back to your leadership team? Because as much as I talked about all the time we had, if some of these things are things we haven't thought of, then we've got to get to work. But to answer your point, we actually have taken that into account, and we're trying to make sure that we have volume beyond, especially those people and individuals who are going to work closely with our kids.
And I reached out to the paraprofessionals within the district through social media and also emailing them, asking, hey, do you have any questions that you would like to ask? And I would say probably 85%, especially our sub-separate program, that's what they were asking.
Great question. In fact, a couple of the members, I know because I'm on some of the groups, you've done that, and I would encourage you to continue to do that. If you're a union representative for a building, or you're a parent in the community, listen, take advantage of those pieces and say, listen, I'm on the task force. Am I missing something? Or is there something you want me to bring to the group? I'd be disappointed, right? And I'd want those individuals to feel represented. The sole purpose of this group is to be a voice, because we can't put everybody in the room together, on a Zoom together. I saw some additional hands, so I don't want to, go ahead, Renee, we're going to go work that way. Yes, right?
So I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
For the hand sanitizer, I know in the past, because of the wax floors, our hand sanitizer was less than 60% alcohol. Has that been changed?
So it really wasn't relative to the wax on the floors as it was to the fire department. Because they didn't want alcohol-based hand sanitizer in the building because of its flammability. But at this point in time, because of the CDC recommendations and so forth, we are now moving up to alcohol-based hand sanitizer at a 60% level. And that's what it'll be throughout the buildings this year in the district.
So that's been upgraded, Renee.
Okay,
Good
great.
question.
And in terms
The nurses beat you to that question, I want you to know, right?
I'm sure they did, I just hadn't heard the answer, so.
Yeah. People to hear though, thanks.
Yes, and then in terms of PPE, are masks going to be required of students and at what grade level?
Yep, so right now the parameters for the state are second grade on up. And that's the expectation, and they're gonna hopefully provide their own, but we're gonna have available masks for those kids and employees who don't. And we need to obviously keep in mind social distance, I mean, all those types of things, signage and all those things, but no, that's the case. We've got our challenges with those young kids.
Yeah.
And some populations in relation.
Right. And then can you speak to the social distancing, the 3 feet as opposed to the 6 feet? CDC and World Health Organization is recommending 6 feet social distancing, and I know American Pediatrics is the one that came out with 3 feet, and so if you could just speak to that a little bit.
So the guidelines that we're doing is on 3 feet, based on American Pediatrics Association that came from health experts. And I know there's certainly different groups that feel differently, but that's the guidelines that we're based in, the parameters that we're using from the state perspective at this point. I can't speak up, Renee, I'd be remiss. I'm not even going to go down a health and medical perspective, but we are using that 3-3 basis at this point, based on the guidance and direction that we receive from the medical experts here within the state, here in Massachusetts. But you're absolutely right. I'm not denying what CDC is set up as guidelines, and so again, that kind of goes to the politics of it a little bit. I think we're doing and the state is doing what they feel is a safe approach for kids. I know that there may be people in this audience and/or individually feel differently. I respect that right. I'm not speaking as a medical expert. I'm based on what they're providing us for. Other comments? Yes.
Allison Sylvia.
Hey, Allison.
Hi. I've got 2, possibly 3 coming in again this year due to illness. But I had a question about whether or not any consideration had been given to when the kids leave and get tested. Sorry, I'm completely fogged up.
No, it's
when the kids leave and get tested and don't have an okay to come back, but they're not so ill that they can't participate in school, have you given any consideration to the live online classes again?
Yeah, so absolutely. So, I mean, I do hear a common theme tonight, which is I think we need to be sure we get that program. I've heard from multiple people about making sure that we have identified what is our protocol and procedure as it relates to identifying students who are ill and staff, and what are the steps that we're going to take. But absolutely part of that inherent plan has always been and will continue to be that we'll provide some instruction for kids potentially who can't return. And that would certainly be an aspect of it.
But have you considered possibly putting cameras into the classroom so they can actually participate in the actual class and get the actual instruction of the teacher rather than...
Great question. More so in so the conversation about the Zooming or streaming classing as it relates to those kids comes up more in a hybrid model where you have a percentage of kids that are not in school. So I know if it's 1 or 2 students, it's typically not been the case. But we're certainly open. I said to the administrators, and I'll say to the teachers that are here, I'm not taking anything off the table at this point in relation to options that might be in our best interest. How are we going to, that hybrid models, this is where they said, my principals reminded me, say, don't say the other 2 are easy. Getting all the kids back safely is a challenge. Remote learning is a challenge. But when I say the challenge of hybrid is, so what do we do when half of the students are home and half of the students are in front of that instructor? To your point, can we do, is there mechanisms, can we use technology to help with that? And so just doing quick math, if you've got 20 students and you've got 10 in front of you, the teacher's going to say to you, the 10 in front are the easy part of the job, right? They're in front of me, I can provide that instruction. What type of instruction am I able to give that child who's home? And how can we use potentially maybe technology or other resources or staff to do that? So all of those options are out there as it relates to what that is. And that's, for anybody who knows me well, I don't dance around many questions. I'll answer them directly, but it's a truthful piece. We haven't really figured out what is the best approach and at what level that makes sense. I can tell you the secondary administrators, just for example, don't see an issue with a 1 week on, 1 week off, having a day here or there. When you've got more self-directed older children, you could see that being easier. Think of a college, course schedule, Tuesdays, Thursdays, but it's a whole different circumstance when you have younger children. And so we had that conversation. So it's still out there.
Yeah,
And
my middle school students who were on fairly past with the online instruction. So
Yeah, I will say this, so just for the parents that are here. So the remote learning and experience that your children had and that we had in the district, I was very impressed by the work that we did. But make no bones about it. What we will need to do will be different than what we did in the spring if we're going a full year of remote learning. Relative to assessment, relative to grading, whether it go to the technology and the use thereof, Zoom and conferencing and so forth, because it will be a much longer period of time and we're going to have to do things differently. So I don't want it to be that we're sitting on our hands saying, you know what, we've got that down. What we did this spring, we'll just roll it out in September and October, and that's what's going to work. No, we learned a lot as a result of how we can do to improve. So much so that the committee supported the fact that we need more devices in kids' hands. And we need training, PD, along with that. Not that we didn't have that previous, but we kind of were forced to do that. So there were some learning experiences. Other questions or comments? In the back?
Hi, Pam Smedberg, just member of the community and grandparent. Twofold, and one is kind of along your line. In terms of the hybrid system.
Yep.
If we do end up doing more of a live type, the younger children, that's going to be a problem. We have a lot of community members that are going to be able to work from home, but we're going to have all we can do because we are in fact working to work, feed them, take them to the bathroom, keep them from fighting and all the things kids do. I can't say for sure at 9 o'clock I can be on this Zoom and at 10:30 I can be on this Zoom because my work phone might be ringing. So consider also, especially for the younger kids, the older kids that can log on and get into it on their own, it's not as much of an issue. But more of a reported, so that today, this is what I have to log on and listen to this teacher recorded lesson and do this plan. And when I can, if that's my lunch break or at 5 o'clock when I'm done, that's when we do it. But to have it be a set structure throughout the day, parents who are fortunate to work at home are still working.
Just to give you a little flavor of that hybrid model, the two principals at the secondary lab, the elementary principals, spoke about the 3 and 4 options, 18 pages long, each document, of the models that they have put in place to address some things that you just referenced. Because it's that detailed, it needs to be that comprehensive. And that's secondary, and I saw some elementary principals and teachers nodding in agreement when you were talking about that whole piece. That's why I think that hybrid model is a real challenge for folks. I'm not saying it shouldn't be part of the process, and it's a step down, a step up, depending on how we do it, and it may be safer, but it really creates some real challenges.
Yeah, for sure. And then just really quickly, the
Sure.
second part would be, we know we've always had a problem with getting substitute teachers. On your survey that you're going to send out, you may find that you've got an awful lot of parents in the community that may meet some of the criteria as substitutes and don't know it. So you may want to include, would you consider substituting?
Yep.
And also reach out to the state commission to find out, have they thought, we've got a pretty well-educated community. We've got a lot of people sitting here with master's degrees, doctorate degrees, who are certainly capable of jumping in, even if they're not in an education field, and would be willing.
Yeah, I think.
Will they allow that, and then at what process to testing? And we've got to get these people quarried before things go wrong and things start shutting down. Get them quarried now.
No, valid point. When I think of support, whether it be crossing guards, whether it be teachers, whether it be collecting data to help our nursing, our nurses, you're right. If there are people out there that meet those qualifications and we can safely do that, and they'd be interested in helping us out, it's certainly something we can do. We have struggled in the past, just in a kind of traditional way.
And have we reached out to like Bridgewater and UMass Dartmouth for their students that are maybe working
Yeah,
on their masters?
We have a pretty good relationship with higher ed locally in relation to not just student teaching assignments, but those kids that are coming out, and some of which come back even during breaks and things and spend some time. We've adjusted some of our criteria, but we can learn from it. We certainly could go out there and say, listen, we have additional needs now that haven't even been identified, and if you are interested, maybe we can work that out.
Yeah.
I will say the state has been very flexible in relation to licensure and those things. They recognize, like so many of us, that there are a lot of individuals, in fact, kids who graduate who weren't able to take the MTEL and teaching test, and they've waived those things and allowed those individuals to be considered for employment, if that's the case. I did see a couple of other hands here.
Hi, I'm sorry I didn't get to introduce myself earlier. My name is Erica Cummings, and I am part of the task force on the health side. So in regards, I had a couple just more thoughts, but in regards to the remote learning, what we did is amazing job as all of the teachers and the staff pulled together. I personally refer to that as a crisis schooling, like instead of remote, because out of the 3 children that I do have, they all struggled in their own way, and it was very difficult, despite all that was offered to them, right? Like that was very difficult. So I'm assuming you kind of answered that there's all these, 18-page documents on how and what that will look like. So I'm not thinking it would look really what it looked like from March until the end of the school year this year. It's going to look totally different if we had to go that remote route.
It will be different. I will say there will be aspects of what we learned that went well will be used, but it will not be a replication of what happened this spring.
That's perfect. So my next thought is, and my next question is, in regards to the health component, have you guys reached out to the local pediatric groups? I do have a connection from 20 years of pediatric med, but one of the local groups is part of a bigger umbrella, and they're a medical home of pediatric practice that does have to, has to follow very remote pieces under the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it's under the Partners umbrella. Have they been reached out to directly, do you know?
I have not, Eric. What I can share with you, in addition to obviously the Board of Health nurse for both towns, we reached out to our school physician, which is Middleborough Pediatrics. And
there's a whole group of them that are under the same umbrella.
And Dr. Bernstein, his office actually said we can't commit to the task force commitment, but you could put me down if you remember some of my first emails about being a consultant, and certainly we can be available. So we've already reached out because, I mean, that in and of itself is going to bring some credibility if, in fact, they're supportive of what we're doing.
Yeah, and it will, because they're also under the Mass General umbrella of Partners, right? And there is another group that I have very extensive communications with that is under the same umbrella, like a sister practice, we'll say, that's over in Foxborough and Rentham, and then there's one in Norwood and Franklin that all have to fall under the same guidelines. And so if there's any other need, then let me know in that aspect, because
You could forward that information to me, Eric, and I can certainly share that, but we've reached out, at least initially, through our group.
Perfect.
Thanks.
That's perfect. Yeah, I was just curious on that, so thank you.
Other comments or questions? Aaron?
I just had a follow-up to an answer you gave already, just to clarify.
Yeah.
And you answered the 3 feet, but I just want to clarify, because of course, the questions are out there. And this came up a little bit at our school group, because we have kindergarten and preschool and, grade 1. If they're not required to wear masks, are they still at a 3-foot distance? When, we're talking about mask breaks and they can only take off their mask at 6 feet and,
You
all
can't
of
see
that.
me, the smirk, maybe you can.
Oh, I can see it a little.
Only because Mr. Ward, if you have been in a graduate class, right, and you're somebody higher ed, and you don't want to get called on by the professor, you kind of look down a little bit. I was like, this is the same question the administrators asked today, right? That same issue in relation, is it without masks? If we're not requiring that, are we talking 6 feet of space, right? Because they're saying, under those circumstances, for example, when our older kids are eating in the cafeteria or something, or we choose and they're not using their mask, we need to be 6 feet. And does that apply at the elementary level? And it's a great question, and I'll tell you what I said to them. I said I'm going to have to get back to you on that as it relates to those kids in pre-K, K, and 1, where they're not. Mike, is that kind of the same answer I gave today? So, Aaron, I'm not ducking it, but it's a legitimate answer, and we have to kind of figure out what that means.
Thank you.
Any other? Sherry?
In response to Mrs. Cummings, I think that this gentleman here who works for Morton Hospital is part of the Stewart.
Part of the Stewart group too.
The Stewart group, so we can reach out to them, or you could help us reach out to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have somebody right on the task force that can do that for us.
So I know this is for those of you that are organized and detailed, right? This has been like a slow crawl. This is the first meeting that you got a little bit more information. The first two, we said hello and welcomed. I said it's coming, and now we're starting to roll out this. And now, if I'm in your seat, this is what you're doing, right? Tell me if I'm wrong. Just you don't even have to raise your hand. Just it's rhetorical. You're sitting saying you've made mention of these plans. Can we see these plans? Because you want the detail behind it. And some of you are on those groups and they're in the process, but they're tweaking and they're changing on a daily basis based on information. So I'm trying to give it to you so it's not, you're not seeing, 6 versions. Mike knows. Mike, the principals have all forwarded their documents to me. They're working documents. And they are literally working documents. I would think between the time we meet again, which is scheduled for the 27th, those documents will be in a much better format to share with this group, because it's also preparing me to submit my initial response to the state, kind of where we're at. So as I receive information that I think is essential, I can get that to you. We have the subcommittee. It looks like we kind of turned into, you guys might be off the hook a little bit. We've done a little bit of the Q&A as opposed to subgroups, and I think I appreciate some of you guys kickstarting that. I will hold off on a survey, today is Monday, till at least Wednesday, to give you a couple of days to provide me an email, a text, relative to some of the things you've brought up, to be sure that's inclusive. I'm also, obviously, we have one school committee member here. I'd like the committee to be aware of surveys that go out. Typically, I try to share that with them in advance as well. So I can do that. I know that's kind of a tight time frame, but the more we don't really have much choice in relation to kind of that time. I told you we got a whole bunch of time, 56 days, said it was a lot of time. Now I'm going the other way saying, yeah, but we can't really afford, so I love the idea to keep your expertise, but I want to just kind of build that into a couple of things. So what I can do, so what will trigger that hopefully, is if I send to everybody tonight this presentation, I'll send it to you either tonight or first thing in the morning and ask if there's some input in relation. I'm not so sure we need to do the smaller groups. I'll be available. I can have Mike right over here and Greg right over there if there's some items that you didn't feel comfortable telling the whole group. I do know there's some other parents and community members that are here. I don't know of anybody who this isn't a huge priority and it's on their mind right now, right? I know a couple of members couldn't. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. You say that a lot it's on the community's mind, and I guess my question is typically what percentage of the community responds to those surveys? On average, there must be a.
So, I'm trying to think of, so the technology survey, we had almost 600 responses on the use of devices under remote learning. So if you think of 2,800 kids, families, 2,000 families. Again, my survey is not going out to the communities of Freetown and Lakeville, they're going to the parents. When I say parent, I'm talking about the parent community.
Yeah.
That just gives you a little idea number-wise.
Do you think it would be beneficial to engage with the entire community at all? Because if we have to make changes to the budget, they're also going to be involved in that decision.
Yeah, so I think my take on that. Certainly, I think having the community at large, and we do have representatives here, right, that go beyond that, aren't parents per se. I don't know if we have the luxury of the time in relation to seeking more funding and resources. I think we have some mechanisms if we identify some additional needs that are financial that we can explore and the school committee can take a look at, whether it be staffing, additional state monies and/or town money that's available, because those both exist relative to COVID. So I'd love to be able to go back to the towns and if we needed more funding and get support. They did approve our budget. Keep in mind, just to give you a little, I know it's getting late. So of the 85 school districts that are regional, only about 12 had their budget approved before July 1. 12 in the state. We were one of the 12 that had both towns or multiple regional towns approved their budget. So we got a budget. We didn't have to revert to our last year's budget, but we did get the budget approved based on the fact that both Freetown and Lakeville are very much concerned about the revenue coming to them from the state and the cuts that are going to be made, with the idea that we wouldn't be going back looking for additional funding. So that's not a doom and gloom. We have some opportunities and we may have to access funding if we think financially we don't have all the resources necessary to do that. I am not opposed to opening it up. I just don't know if we have the time available to us to do that. I mean, folks, what do you think? I think we're going to get I think we're going to get a decent response to this piece. Right? I think this is, again, I'm not saying the other things weren't important, but I think this is a priority. It should be a priority, and and certainly we'll start it out through email, but if we need to maybe get social media to help us in that process a little bit and get the word out through task force members here, we can certainly do so. Yep, Eric?
The only other thing that I would do is perhaps if you sent out an email saying that within the next 48 hours there's going to be a survey, just as like a pay as a catch system, right? Like that would be helpful. But on the survey, the other one thing that I would potentially mention is in ask, and I can send this to you, but a lot of physical forms that do come back, a lot of their kids' diagnoses are not on it because in the overall school environment, it's not a health concern, but it potentially could be a health concern with COVID. Yep. So one of the questions could be, does your child have any, health concerns? Is your child at a higher risk level or something? Because those kids you may have to, everybody else may be 3 feet, but you might need, even if it's 4 feet or 5 feet, to just give them a little extra protection. And if there's some kids with any issues that are not on health forms, because many diagnoses do get cut off. They're not on there.
So with the number of health experts, I won't put anybody in the spot, whether it be nurses or doctors that are here or other practitioners, if you could forward me a suggestion or comment in relation to that, specifically what that question could look like, I certainly can. I've seen that included in some, and I think it's a great idea. And I just asked to be specific what that could look like. I certainly think it can be included. Any other final comments or thoughts? Folks, do we need to break up into subgroups? I'm guessing at this point, I think we kind of handled it. And in fact, in many ways, I think it's good because we all get to hear some of those issues. Renee, did you?
I was just going to say, like, in the interest of time, perhaps if you wanted to break into subgroups, we could do that next Monday. Give us time to reflect on what kinds of questions
So is
want.
it too much of a gap? Will you tell me, folks? Our next scheduled meeting is the 27th.
We just meet each other and then break up. We could just meet each other and then break up so we know who we're dealing with.
Just do a subgroup meeting.
Yep.
Say hello.
Why don't actually, Joan, just for a second, if that's the case, and we can discuss that's the case, even though I just said, before we adjourn though, we won't come back to even together as a group. What I'm going to ask then, Greg Goodwin, if you could kind of go to the front there, kind of socially distance. He'll be for facilities and the environment. Mike Ward, teaching and learning. Kind of backtracked off on that. Joan Bullock is going to represent Paula Mueller, and Jen happens to be here as well for nursing, health, social, emotional issues. Just jot down any questions or items. introducing yourself. If you can't stay, I understand, you've committed to this. I don't want to, I have no problem with scheduling another meeting next Monday. My only reservation about doing that is knowing the time frame and how slow the process has been on new information. I want to be able to be sure that I can get those plans and some more detail in front of you. Sherry, what are your thoughts?
How about if the commissioner puts out the information about the busing, we meet? You send it out and say we meet, and if not, we just leave it till the 27th, because I don't think there's anything else coming up.
So if new guidance comes out, you're going to get it. I can tell you that right now. You will receive it from me, and if that's the case, it may trigger the need to have an additional meeting. But right now, we're scheduled for the 27th. Other thoughts or comments? I heard Andrea?
No, I'm just saying we gotta get guidance by next week.
If I may, the hospital profession was in a similar situation. I don't think they're withholding information. I think they're developing these documents and trying to make informed decisions, and it just isn't as quick as we would like it to be. I really don't. I don't envy the Commissioner of Education, who I have to say, I will say this, has been extremely supportive of the schools, as is the governor. I'm hoping they let Massachusetts do what we can do, right? When I say we, that the country, that we aren't treated in Massachusetts or in Freetown-Lakeville like some community that's overwhelmed right now in another part of the country. I hope that's the case, and that goes to where we need to be sure that we're sharing that information. So, back corner, health, social, emotion, just want to at least even introduce yourself, give Joan any questions, she'll jot them down. Mike here, teaching and learning. I'm going to just stay here, Greg will be over there. Come see me individually. Thank you, thank you. You will get this presentation, if not tonight, first thing in the morning.